So in this tech talk, I'd like to talk about the three primary considerations when you're evaluating an iPaaS solution, and that's integration platform as a service. And the three considerations are, number one, design, separating design from execution, which we talked about in a previous video. And really it's the idea that you can have execution happen wherever you need it to, and you do that all through a single user experience that's in the cloud. So that's number one. The second consideration, which we're going to cover in more detail here, is very broad pattern support and connectivity. In the cloud hybrid landscape, there are a much broader set of patterns that you need to be able to solve for than you'll find in a traditional on-premise data warehousing environment. So we're going to look at that. And then the third and final piece is security, which is something that we've invested very heavily because we know it's an absolute deal breaker when it comes to hybrid cloud. So let's just take a look at this broad pattern support. So typically what we'll find is in a data warehousing scenario, really you've got one pattern that you're solving for, either ETL or ELT. Really it's bulk data movement. So you may have a solution that solves for that. But then in the cloud we have all sorts of other different patterns. So for example, we have request response style API interaction. So we have the need to interact with different APIs, orchestrate that response, and then send that payload back. Create composite APIs, maybe do some human tasks and workflow management. We also may have the need for a hub and spoke model. So this is, rather than an ESB, you're thinking about things like store and forward. So you're taking, instead of having lots of different point-to-point solutions that reach out to lots of different, to reach out to the same account data, for example, and then send that to multiple sources, multiple subscribers. Instead, the idea is that you pull it down once into a canonical hub, and then you can provide that in different latencies to the different targets that need it, the different subscribers. That's another pattern, right? We also find that data quality needs to go throughout all of this. You might also find that you need, for example, something like CDC, change data capture, where you're listening for different types of events. You're doing more event-based. You might be doing streaming. There's a lot of different use cases that if you're going to get full ROI out of your cloud investments, you need a solution that's able to handle all of these. Now the other thing here is, if you think about the execution engine, so typically what happens with iPaaS vendors is they tend to focus in on a particular sweet spot. So maybe they've got a workflow engine that is very good at handling this kind of request response. It's good at dealing with hierarchical data in APIs. Well, typically those engines are not very good at dealing with bulk data, right? They may not be also able to deal with this hub and spoke architecture that we talked about before. Again, beyond an ESB, we're not talking about messaging, we're talking about storing and forwarding data at different latencies. They may not be, they may be able to handle the events, listening for events, but you wouldn't use that for data warehousing, large volumes of, loading a data lake, for example. And then you could look at other solutions that maybe are really good in the bulk data movement, but they can't really handle the hierarchical request response. They're not very good at workflow, maybe can't support this. Maybe they can do some data quality rules, but you get the idea. Now this is the reason that we have a multi-engine approach. So within the secure agents that we have, where we handle execution, we have multiple engines in those secure agents that are completely managed for you. So they're self-maintaining, self-managing. But the beauty of this is we can choose, so this is Informatica Intelligent Cloud Services, our iPaaS solution. We automatically at runtime will choose the solution, the engine that's most performant for your needs. But you're managing this all through a single user interface. So at design time, you don't have to worry about those differences. but at runtime we're going to choose the most optimal execution engine for you. And then the final point is on security. Now, security is a real deal breaker when it comes to cloud data management. Obviously, there's a lot of compliance out there, a lot more than we typically had a few years ago. And for this reason, we've invested very heavily in security. So our iPaaS solution is fully HIPAA compliant. We have SOC 2, SOC 3 compliance as well. The sort of security that you would typically see with the big players like AWS, Azure, and a lot of the vendors out there. Not only do they not have broad pattern support, but they also don't have broad support for security as well. They typically piggyback off the security that's present in AWS, but we've invested very heavily in our own security to get up to the same level that those cloud providers have. And you can check that out if you go to trust.informatica.com. You'll be able to see out there our certifications as well. So when you're next thinking about an upcoming project, just think about those three considerations: separating out design from execution, broad pattern and connectivity support with multiple engines that are able to cope with that, and finally, rock solid security. Thanks very much.